A very good evening to you. You are watching the Hot Seat on TV1. Today we have an interesting topic to discuss. Be it your mother, your sister, even your wife, is she safe at her workplace when she is traveling on the road or when she is carrying out her day-to-day activities? Is she safe? What is gender-based violence? Do we have gender-based violence in Sri Lanka? To answer all these questions and more, we have an eminent guest on the show tonight, Mr. Alan Sibanala, who is the National Chair of the Program Against Gender-Based Violence, and he is also a representative of the United Nations Population Fund. A very good evening to you, sir. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Firstly, let me ask you, what is gender-based violence?
Gender-based violence includes any forms of violence or discrimination, be it physical, emotional, financial, that is manifested against a woman or against a man, but normally takes place between men and women.
So we know that all throughout the world, a number of organizations like the United Nations in this case have come forward to educate people on gender-based violence, to actually carry out programs against gender-based violence. United Nations has been very active in our country as well when it comes to tackling this issue. So far, if you have any program at the moment running, can you explain us about what the United Nations does to tackle gender-based violence in our country?
Yes, I can say that. First of all, we are chairing the National Forum Against Gender-Based Violence, which brings together 52 organizations, national NGOs, international NGOs, United Nations, and the government. Very important that the government is there. Secondly, as individual agencies, and I don't want to single out anyone in particular, there has been very recently a launch of national policy framework and plan of action against sexual and gender-based violence with the government. There has been a comprehensive plan to address specific issues regarding female-headed households, among which you have a big prevalence of gender-based violence. And then you have, of course, the work of individual agencies that are a bit more technical, right? They are supporting either NGOs that are giving services, shelter, legal counseling, but also medical help. And in the case of my agency, we are doing a lot on data, on evidence-based data, on research, as well as on human interest stories, so that we hear what is happening where, what is the sort of magnitude of the problem. And then, last but not least, what we do is that we create and we strengthen referral systems. So if you are subject or a victim of gender-based violence, what happens? What happens afterwards? How is it recorded, and who is being held accountable that you're actually given the help that you need?
So another concept that people of our country have is when it comes to gender-based violence, they think that sexual harassment against women is what we mean by gender-based violence. Is this correct, or is this a misnomer, or is there more to gender-based violence than sexual harassment?
It is correct, but there is definitely more.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest issues that is not talked about enough. Sexual harassment is unacceptable. It is a crime. It is something that you can see and feel immediately, right? Emotional violence, emotional blackmailing, financial blackmailing is something that is much more subtle. And I would actually say that this is as much, if not more, widespread, because it takes place in the home. It takes place within and among people that you know. It's not being touched on the bus by a stranger and then he runs out of the next stop. This is your husband. This is your father. This is your uncle. This is any relative who lives with you or who you are close to. And that emotional violence is extremely tricky. And so there is also emotional harassment, right? Example of businesswomen or women who want to make a living and they're being harassed by clients, right? By customers or by their patrons. So there is a large variety of this phenomenon.
And when it comes to that point, now the question arises as to how you can prove this actually, whether you are emotionally blackmailed or whether you are emotionally violated. How do you measure this, or how do you prove this?
Right. Well, the first is that you need to report it, right? I know we are in a culture of gossip, and where people are taking things not always very seriously, right? Time and again, I have heard that a woman goes to either a police station or to a hospital or to a district secretariat, and there's a little bit of a dismissive attitude, right? When they say, well, I think you're exaggerating, just go home to your husband and work it out, and or go and pray, and things will get better, and so forth. That is the first problem. That is the problem of not taking it seriously. Now, how can you prove? If it is physical violence or sexual violence, and it goes to in front of a court magistrate, there is a number of steps that are taken before. They are taken by the judicial medical officer in a hospital, they are taken by a psychologist, and they put the case in terms of medical and psychological abuse that has taken. Right? So these are professionals that have evidence. In terms of sexual abuse, there is even the College of Forensic Pathologists that has very detailed guidelines, not only on how you can prove forensically, pathologically, medically that you've been subject to sexual abuse, but also then how that case is taken to the judicial medical officer. Now, last but not least, and I have heard on a number of occasions that there is harassment over cyberspace, right? And cyberspace, that's computers and phones and smartphones. Now, I don't want to go into the details of pornography, of child pornography, but of actually extortion, blackmail, sexting, etc. that happens on the internet. But what I want to say is that there are incidents of harassing a woman over the phone, over Snapchat, WhatsApp, Viber, whatever it is, and that is the proof. You need to take a screenshot, or you need to store that message with the phone number and report it to the police. That's the way it's supposed to be done.
We have to go into a short commercial break, but before that, let me ask you another interesting question that came up to me right now. Is now with time being going, where there is technology developing day by day, as like you said, there are new forms of methods of harassment that are coming into play. Do you think that the United Nations, the government of Sri Lanka, and the other 52 organizations that you mentioned, do you think that with this developing techniques, with the developing technology, they will be able to cope up with whatever is going on in terms of gender-based violence? Do you think that the 52 agencies, the government, the United Nations can cope up with what's going on?
Well, let's look at it this way. Information and communication technology is a problem, but it's also a solution, right? And I think it's looking at it from a solution perspective that we can actually maximize what technology can give us. But that means that we have to go out of our way and work with other partners that we haven't been working with before. I'm talking about ICTA, I'm talking about CERT, I'm talking about these highly specialized government or private agencies that are specialists when it comes to IP address location, or when it comes to domain naming issues, or when it comes to actually investigating into who did the crime, either through the phone or through the internet. So I think that's an important step that we need to undertake.
With that, we will go into a short commercial break. Stay with us. You are watching The Hot Seat. Welcome back. You are watching The Hot Seat on TV1. This evening we are discussing about gender-based violence in Sri Lanka. We've so far discussed as to what gender-based violence is and how the United Nations and other organizations have tackled this issue and how they are planning to tackle this in the future. Now let me focus the attention with our guest Mr. Abban Sibanala as to how the United Nations and how the government of Sri Lanka has joined together in enacting these methods to actually stop gender-based violence in Sri Lanka. So, Mr. Sibanala, there is a saying that you cannot clap with one hand. You cannot do anything single-handedly. You cannot live as an island. So, basically, in that terms, in that context, we know that you obviously need the support of our people, or the people of the country, the government and other institutions? What is the support that you get at the moment?
It goes both ways, right? I think the support that we're giving to the government has to be reciprocated, and so the support that the government gets has to come back to us and so forth. I think that is exactly what partnerships are about. That is what that relationship is about between the United Nations and government. I'm very proud to be working with government, who in this case is my hierarchy, right? I mean, I'm accountable vis-à-vis the government because I'm accredited here. So let's start with the policy level, right? Working on strong policies, a strong legal framework, a strong policy framework. As I said, National Plan of Action Against Gender-Based Violence, which is a multi-sectoral plan involving a number of ministries, a number of sectors, standardizing of shelters, or standardizing standard operating procedures for operationalizing shelters, mechanisms that help women at the district level, at the lower level, and so forth. So that's what we do from the normative side. Now, the second thing is that when it comes to prevention, right? There is no doubt that the government has an outreach capacity that cannot be compared with what we do. But the trick is to really now make it in a way so that it's not a government issue per se, so that it is not politicized, and number two, that it is an issue that is easily understood. So we have to have a language that is clear. Now, and that language has to be comprised of two parts. On one hand, sensitizing and raising awareness about what it is, and the second is to say it is a crime. It is not acceptable. It is an offense. And when you do that, this is what happens, because here is the section of the penal code, here is the section of the criminal code. Then, so that whole aspect of prevention is very, very important. And then last but not least, response. Response now to, as you said earlier on, when you are a survivor, when you are a victim, or you have seen any of these incidents. Where do you report it? How do you report it? Who is giving you the responsibility that something actually happens? And here's an important aspect. That's the aspect of impunity. Because I often hear that, well, you can report it, but nothing will happen. And I want to take this opportunity to say that 7 years of a court case that is currently the period that a woman has to face because she's decided to report an abuser, someone who has committed an abuse, is way too long. I mean, that is just unacceptable. I know that the legal system is heavy, and there's a large backload of cases, but there should be ways and means to sort of expedite at least the judicial and the legal processes. Another
allegation that is raised when it comes to matters like gender-based violence and harassment or violence against women is that this issue of gender-based violence is created by the West, and that we don't have such a problem in our country, and that women are treated fairly well. What do you have to say about this?
It's not right, number one. Of course, well, let's say it this way. Gender-based violence exists around the globe. It's in my home country, it is in the north, in the south, east, west. It exists, unfortunately. That's why we're having these campaigns. That's why we have to have 16 days of activism, right? So it exists everywhere. So it's not invented. But what I find very regretful is that it is often a discourse of some decision makers or of some policy makers, and they use it as an excuse. And they use it by saying, well, because it's you saying it, you don't understand the culture. And that's true. I don't understand the culture, because the culture of Sri Lanka, the socio-cultural dimensions are so complex, right? But it is a human right issue. It is a legal issue. It is not acceptable to treat a woman like something or somebody cheap. And the second thing is that we don't have figures, and that is also true, because we don't have evidence-based data. We don't have enough research, and we don't have enough studies. So we're operating on an anecdotal level, right? But we have started working on that we have good research, good evidence-based data, and that we link that data to the referral mechanism, so that when you go and you report, you are given a number or a serial or a code so that you actually can trace what happened to the offender or the perpetrator.
Thank you very much. With that, we go into another short commercial break. Stay with us. You are watching The Hot Seat. Very good evening to you. You are watching The Hot Seat on TV1. We are in the final session of the show. This evening we have Alan Sibanala joining us to talk about matters pertaining to gender-based violence. Ms. Sibanala, now we have been in discussion about gender-based violence throughout the program. Now let me focus the attention on to some positive matters with regard to how you have been how you have been able to tackle this matter. You have initiated a 16 days activism program running to educate people, to inform people about the matter. How is that faring? How are you successful?
Well, it's the 16 days that have been created globally by the United Nations, and I am one of those who say that we need 365 days. It should not be 16 days during which we are reminded that this problem exists. So I always say that a little bit jokingly, because I think in a country like this is what is needed, right? I mean, we have to be reminded every single day. Now, the positive signs, the government has just 2 weeks ago launched a national plan of action against gender-based violence. Excellent idea, very good, excellent document. The problem is, who is monitoring its implementation? Who is being held accountable where we can say, aha, things are actually changing? The second positive thing is that there is, I believe, and again it goes back to information technologies and empowerment of women and empowerment of young women, social change entrepreneurship, whereby we have more and more fora or platforms, innovation labs, where young women think that one way of addressing gender-based violence is to do it with, let's say, a campaign. And I want to mention this, that we have had one of our younger staff developing a campaign that is a booklet where you can talk about gender-based violence among peers in schools, sports clubs, etc. And one of the biggest employers in this country has taken that upon themselves, and they will distribute that among their large workforce in 3 languages. So you see, there are a number of good steps that are being undertaken. And last but not least, I think there is also an increased awareness among policymakers. But the problem, it's always a bit a double-edged sword, because once you start talking about a topic like this, you're often identified as an activist. And there's nothing wrong with an activist. The problem with an activist is that he or she is not always taken seriously by a large part of an audience that, you know, they're not comfortable with. So the issue here is to bring this to policymakers and decision makers that are out of this sphere. Finance, economy, national development, national planning, justice, you see, so that there is more and more of an awareness. And I want to salute here the political leadership, where you have the wife of the Prime Minister, who is a very active campaigner and a scholar on the issue, and that's what we need. And we need role models, we need celebrities, we need public figures that speak up about this, that set the examples, men speaking to men, women speaking to women, couples speaking to couples. And I'm looking forward that this is actually going to be one of the things that we're doing in the future, is now to bring these social change campaigns with celebrities to have a massive outreach about this phenomenon, which is unacceptable.
Yes, a point that you mentioned previously on the show was that you can use the same technology that is used to harass women or carry out gender-based violence, can be used to actually as a solution. We know that when compared, do you agree with me if I say that when compared to maybe 5 years back and when compared to now, if you talk about this topic, there is a situation where people are more welcoming, people want to hear, people want to make a change. Do you agree if I say this? Yes,
absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. And that is a good sign. That is a sign of our times, right? But let me repeat. Government hotline 1938, hotline of the National Child Protection Authority 1929. That's something that you need to call when you're experiencing a problem. A newly launched website of this national forum, which you can Google and find the www, is also something where you can actually post anonymously, right? So that you know that something has happened. We've also developed an application for your smartphone, emergency app, whereby you see that if you're in this district, where do you get help fastest, etc. So yes, technology is definitely should be seen as a solution to the problem.
Final question, I think, because we are running out of time now. One matter that is, when you're looking at this issue from Sri Lankan perspective, is that when you go into the legal system of our country, it on average takes about 10 years for the case to actually finish. Now, if someone comes forward, a lady or a man comes forward and says that he or she has been harassed or she has been subject to gender-based violence, that person will have to go through the legal system for almost 10 years. Is there any form of protection that this person, he or she, will get when they come forward and tell their concerns or raise or make a complaint with regard to what happened to them?
On paper, yes. Witness protection and protection against retaliation, right? But you know that in reality it is not that easy, and especially in rural areas where everyone knows everyone, so it's a bit more tricky. But I would like to say that it's also an issue of stigma, that it's not talked about, that it's actually shameful to say within your family or within your community or your village that this is something that is happening, because you dishonor the family, and that is wrong. It is not acceptable, whether it is within the family or outside the family. So the legal system is heavy, and I think we need to really strengthen the capacity of the legal system, of good functioning institutions that are running smoother and more effectively. I think
the final question, promise. This time around, when the Committee Against Corruption of the United Nations convened, I think our Attorney General was also present there. One point that was raised there is that the Sri Lankan government actually comes up with the policies, and that there is no one there to actually see through whether it actually happens. Even you mentioned that point. Do you think that the government of our country, is there something more that they can do, or are they doing enough to tackle this issue?
There is something more that you can do. It's called accountability. I think having an accountability mechanism whereby you make it public, where you show that these are policies, these are issues that everyone can see, and we are holding X, Y, or Z accountable, right? And that has to be at all levels. The level of a decision maker, I always say decision maker is not only a politician, right? It is someone who is in a leadership position. And so it is important that you have a mechanism where you trace accountability. But that means that you have to be transparent. And you have to have good, solid data. Data that is more than statistics, that is stories that you and I write, but it's also research, academic research, etc. So the issue is really to make sure that your policies and your existing laws are equitably accessed by everyone, and that there is a responsibility and an accountability of the duty bearers.
Thank you very much for joining us on the show this evening. We hope and pray that on behalf of our country that your programs will be successful, and we can come to a situation where there is reduced gender-based violence, or there is zero gender-based violence in our country. Thank you for watching. You have been watching The Hot Seat for the News First team. I'm Chaturanga Pawarachi.